Hello, and welcome back to another great episode of the Avoid Crisis podcast. I'm Ray Arellano, and I'm here with my co host, Alan Plyler. Alan, Happy New Year, and welcome back after the holiday break.
And you as well, Ray. And why don't you introduce our guest here today?
That'd be great. It's Our guest today is David Pasiek, and he is the founder of a really cool company called Creator Pro AI. And you can find him at www.creatorpro.ai. Alan, you met David at a conference or something, and you guys were chatting about really cool stuff. Invited him on. What was it about David that inspired you to invite him on? And then once we get that intro, David, we're going to turn to you to get some conversation and input.
Yeah. So you know, Ray, that I've been quite involved here in the AI community and especially startups and the investor community, and talking to different people about who's really in the AI space and who's making a difference. And so one of the startups that I had talked to happened to mention David, and I said, he sounds like somebody that would be really good to connect with. Can you maybe arrange for an introduction? And after that introduction, I found out, well, David's been on other podcasts. He's kind of recognized as an expert. He's doing things that are just phenomenal. He's taking AI into a space. It doesn't matter what that space is. Call it the corporation, call it the LLC, call it the partnership, call it the sole proprietor. And he's looked at this whole environment and said, what happens if we take AI and
So,
leverage it within that
David, what I'm
organization?
understanding is that in your conversation,
hmm Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're
So,
breaking up a bit, Alan. So I'm going to take
Oh,
over.
okay.
So yeah, go ahead. Why don't you run with that, David?
yeah. So first, I want to say thank you for that nice introduction, and thank you for having me on today on the show. Um, so, with my approach on Creator Pro, I took a different approach than a lot of people in AI. A lot of people in AI, I would say, focus on AI as a technology, right? We have to develop all these new features. We have to learn how to engineer prompts. And of course, that makes sense because the people who are developing AI are coming primarily from that background. And that's kind of how also we've been kind of socialized our entire lives to think about AI as a technology. What I found is that actually when you're learning how to use AI, you're actually you're actually using more of a collaboration and communication skills. So if someone is running a business or they have a team, you're learning how to do things like project management. You're learning how to communicate your needs. You're learning how to shape expectations and craft the flow of narratives or creating proposals or creating all different types of strategic documents. And what I found is that when I've been working with people in doing AI trainings and in developing AI models, I found that the biggest obstacle that a lot of people have in terms of learning how to use
David, I think you
AI.
froze up a bit there. So I think I last heard is when you're working with people.
Hey Ray, I think it's on your side actually. I'm hearing David and Alan all right.
Yeah, let me
Yeah,
let me ask you a question, David, because I know we go back and forth on some of these
t- t-
things.
sure.
And one of the things I wanted to maybe have you talk about, I know that you talk about collaboration and communication, and you
Yeah.
talk about leveraging the individual or the organization, the entity, and you mentioned 10x. And
hmm
so the idea was that you personally felt as though you were almost 10 times levered of yourself. And by the way, I ended up
Absolutely.
thinking about that. And I called my mother because I was telling her, this is really exciting. You got to listen to the podcast. It's going to be 10x for me. I'm going to be bigger and better. And she goes, if you're going to be that much bigger, maybe you shouldn't come over for dinner as much. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, you can think about AI in this way. We have these models that are basically trained on the collective intelligence, collective knowledge of all of humanity. I mean, they've literally ingested the entire internet and have started to kind of consolidate and allow you to tap into that knowledge. And so imagine if you're running a business, instead of having to like you would normally have to delegate things, and you have like a big team, and then you send something to them, and then they kind of come back to you later, and you have to sort of manage all of those different types of expectations. Um, with AI, with something like ChatGPT or Claude or these different platforms, you now have the direct access, the direct ability to tap into that collective knowledge of humanity, of all these expert roles, just immediately. So you don't have to wait for someone to get back to you. You can immediately express your needs. You can immediately go after what you need, and then you get that back instantly. What I found, you can talk about things like 10x productivity, you can talk about creativity, you can talk about innovation, all that sort of stuff. But all of that stuff, it sounds great, but the biggest, the biggest transformative impact that I've experienced with AI is that when you're able to 10x everything, when you're able to do in a matter of hours or days what used to take you weeks or months, that is just so incredibly empowering. It's not just about the productivity and the results. It's like, oh my gosh, I am now able to accomplish in a day that what used to take me, weeks or months. And when you have that, it's like this glass ceiling has been kind of removed, and you feel this kind of limitless potential. And that to me is what's been the most exciting. I would also say it's been the most counterintuitive. So I remember, for example, I remember for my third book, I interviewed Martin Ford. Martin Ford wrote the international bestseller Rise of the Robots, and he talked about this jobless future that was coming, where AI was going to automate away all these jobs, and we were going to be worried about how the economy would run because there would be so many jobs eliminated. So I had all these kind of fear and anxiety and scarcity associated with AI. And I found that the exact opposite experience was true for me. I found that I was so scared that AI was going to take my job. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I can do so much just by myself. I can now run a company by myself or with a small team, and I can compete with an organization that might have 50, 100 employees. And it's just amazing that sense of empowerment and excitement that happens when you're able to do that. And I feel like I try to get across this idea of AI being a collaboration or communication skill, or I try to talk about empowerment, because so many people are just kind of hung up on like this fear and anxiety, or I have to do something right. You just have to dive in and start doing the work.
Ray, do you have some thoughts here about just AI and its adoption that you wanted to ask David?
Well, yeah, there's some really good launch points there.
Yeah.
I like the idea of the like a collaboration tool, a communication tool, a leverage, if you will,
Yeah.
versus a tech tool. I think the idea there is that when particularly with change, and it's funny as we were prepping for the show here and doing our sound checks and all that, we were running into change ourselves and some of our hardware and some of the software, the UI, UX, and we're like, it's changed, darn it. And it's like, but wait a minute, some of this change really does help make us better. And I think that's what I'm hearing you talk about is that don't get afraid of the tech, don't get afraid of the tool. Think of it as a collaborative tool, a communication tool. It's something that's empowering, and it's not something to be feared. You should embrace it.
David,
Absolutely.
How do you get people through that journey, over that, through that psychological barrier?
So so most of my career has been spent doing, I would say, dialogue-based approaches to innovation and strategy. So I work mostly with startup leaders and founders, and I would lead small teams. I would do, I would solicit information from them, and then have a dialogue to shape their strategy, to shape their products, to shape their marketing and communication methods and stuff like that. What I found in my earlier career experience was that oftentimes the founders, they know the answers, they just don't know how to articulate them. And so I've found that in terms of teaching people how to use AI, I take the same exact approach. I found that there's I recommend that people write in a kind of a sort of stream of what I would call a stream of consciousness approach, where basically you express full thoughts, you express your a complete amount of context. A lot of times there's this approach that people would refer to as prompt engineering, this idea that you have to have a very specific types of outputs. But actually, I found that the opposite is true, that you need to fully express what's going on, what you're feeling. There's also been some interesting research that actually, when you express emotions, when you express things that sound like sort of non-technical language, that you're actually giving much more context to the AI. And so when you're expressing things like, this is really important to me, or I feel very strongly about this, or I'm scared of this, or I really love this, or so on, that type of language provides a lot more context. Now, I mention all of this stuff because you're asking about how do you get people past like the fear and insecurity. Um, the more that you're able to communicate from a kind of deeper sense of who you are, the more you're able to communicate in a more kind of authentic and transparent way, the better results you're going to get. And I found that also to be incredibly counterintuitive. I remember one of my clients had even told me something like she never felt more seen than when she's communicating with AI. And it's really kind of hard to wrap your head around that. The idea that that you would feel like you're being validated as a person. And I think the user experience of using AI. I mean, at this point, I'm using it probably 6 to 8 hours a day for the past year. What I found is that when you're able to communicate and then you immediately get an intelligent, empathetic, like kind of kind response, that is just incredibly validating to you as a person, and it's very encouraging and affirming. And as if you're running a company or a business, you actually, it's that type of experience that I think is very helpful. That a lot of like you need that sense of encouragement to kind of push through difficult times. And it's been very surprising to me and to a lot of people that I've worked with that's actually coming from an interaction with a computer.
Yeah, David, I use AI quite a bit
Yeah, it's
myself.
pretty amazing. I I
Yeah,
I
Yeah,
I know that in the startup space.
yeah. So I think the question I have there is, I know that you've helped quite a bit of companies in their journey and using tools and helping to deploy that, using some of the guidance that you have from Creator Pro. Um, I think it might be helpful if you kind of put this into maybe some understandings for people who may not quite understand exactly the journey that's going on right now with the adoption of
sure.
AI. And I think maybe you can, go back to maybe your upper level studies from Princeton and put in some perspective there from a historical
Mm,
point of view, and just talk about maybe like what's this look like in we have this life as we knew it before and what we're going to know in the after with AI. Maybe you can put it into some historical perspective. Maybe you have some other um, time frames that you can point to say, hey, look at what happened here. Um, what are your thoughts there?
sure. So yeah, so to give context to the listeners, I did PhD research at Princeton, and I studied actually religions of the Americas, and I looked at big mass shifts in. I looked at the relationship between how mass movements grow and spread and the adoption of different types of technologies. So, for example, you can't really think of the 60s counterculture independent of like color TV. You can't think of things like the civil rights independently of the mass adoptions of television and those images beaming into people's homes. Similarly, you go back to the rise of nation states in Europe, and you think of that in relationship to Gutenberg and the printing press. There's kind of correlation between all these different types of mass movements throughout history and these shifts in how people communicate. And we can see even the last like sort of 20 years how much the average how much life as we know it has shifted in relationship to the adoption of the internet, then social media, and then smartphones, and now we have AI. I think AI will be the most significant shift that we're going to experience in our lifetimes. There's this quote from Jack Dorsey, the one of the co-founders of Twitter. He says that basically like the best the best technology disappears into the background. And so right now, imagine we're talking about AI this and AI that. Like I think, for example, when I was growing up, there was a time when newscasters would go live via satellite, right? And of course, they don't say that anymore, right? The via satellite just kind of disappeared into the background. What we're going to find over the next 10, 20 years, AI is going to be started, it's going to start integrating into everything. It's going to start disappearing into the background. You're going to be able to get recommendations for products. You'll be able to have AI agents that are out there looking for things on your behalf. That's going to change the nature of how we buy and sell everything, right? You won't have to worry about going to the stores or doing shopping for yourself. You'll be able to have agents do that. As we rely more heavily on AI, it's going to change how we interact with the internet. Some people think that that websites might even disappear. Of course, we're getting all different types of AI generated content. So what does that look like in kind of the content and communication space? There's so much stuff that's happening, and at the same time, we're in 5-10 years, this is just going to kind of start sort of fading into the background. It's just going to become part of the nature of everyday life. My personal approach in terms of how I've approached Creator Pro and how I approach trainings and building a business is I try and focus on the skills and techniques and things that are not going to change. So I focus, for example, on things like how do you create AIs that are based upon best practices in sales, in marketing, in building funnels, in finance. I focus on the core kind of best practices of how to run a business and then create AI models and trainings around that, because those are the things that I think are not going to change. There's these kind of proven best practices of how teams and humans collaborate and how we interact with our customers that I think are not going to change. And we try to find a balance then between what is it that's sort of uniquely human and that's kind of here to stay versus things that are going to change. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's just such an amazing and exciting time. I think in this kind of broader historical perspective, I think in many ways, the things that happen in the next 5 to 10, 15 years are going to shape, the next kind of 1,000 years of human history. And we're kind of we're the bridge generation, right? So we're the last generation to go from this analog world into this AI world. And there's so much happening and changing so fast. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around it. And it's also kind of hard to think about sometimes, right? Because we're right in the middle of all this change. But it's a really kind of exciting time to be alive.
So, David, you brought up earlier. You were talking about kind of strategy and founders and almost like C-suite
Yeah.
level. Talking about using AI to leverage what they're doing at that level. And so I kind of think of that as say the exec suite or the manager suite, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And then right there, you were talking a little bit more about, I would say more like hands-on use case, frontline workers, if you will. And so I kind of see that as like a bottom-up approach. What are your thoughts on top-down versus bottom-up? How do we ensure that they meet and that they're aligned, etc.? I mean, as business owners and people workers, how do we understand where we fit in, where the listener fits in, and how we can best use it to make sure we're aligned within the organization, top-down versus bottom-up?
Sure. So I think let's say from a top-down perspective, you need to be shaping your strategy, right? So you need to be shaping the vision for your organization. You also need to be shaping your brand messaging, your values, the things that you think will not change, the things that are kind of your North Star. I always feel like there's a lot of talk about people say you should start with your why. Your why actually emerges from the problem you solve and from your target audience. So why do I exist? Well, I exist to solve these particular problems for these particular types of people. And so, in a sense, like, and I think of that also in relationship to this kind of top down versus bottom up. So, when you think of your why, okay, from a bottom up perspective, I'm creating products and services that solve these particular problems for these particular people. I need to create messaging and stories that resonate with that type of audience. I need to be connecting with them on a human level as well. I need to make sure that I'm addressing their needs. I also think that there's what I call functional and emotional benefits of the types of things that you offer. So functional benefit for me would be something like I help you to 10x your productivity. I help you to have better results. I help you to do all of these things in a more kind of seamless way with creativity, innovation, stuff like that. An emotional thing would be the types of things that I was talking about earlier. I help empower business owners. I help empower founders and empower teams, and that sense of cohesiveness as a team, of being able to accomplish more together. Um,
David, one of the things that we talked about was this shift from what we know as the internet today, where you're going
yeah,
to a website and you're going to click on something, and the action response methodology is really I'm looking, I'm clicking, I'm making things happen, I'm logging in, I'm trying to get to something, and that's going to be shifting with AI to the use of natural language. And what does that mean to be human? And what does it mean as far as, your personal assistant or just your interaction in the home or interaction in the workplace whenever you're using natural language to replace some of this, mouse click that we have now?
yeah. So I mean, natural language is basically becoming the interface of technology. So you can express in words what you want to an AI model, and it will then be able to go out and act on your behalf. Um, the thing that's really kind of hard to wrap our heads around, I think, with AI is that in 5, 10, 15 years, someone could even become the CTO of a tech company and not even know how to write a line of code. That actually they will get that things will get to a point where you will be able to articulate exactly what you need, and the AI models will be able to build that on your behalf.
Mm.
So what does that do to the um, what does that do to the structure of society? You think of like the current way things are. You think of these massive technology companies that have all of this power. You think of all the specialized knowledge and skill sets that are associated with developing programs and engineering and stuff like that. That power is now going to be available to anyone. Um, we wonder then if anyone can create an app or a product, what does that do to the marketplace? Does it get flooded with ideas? What does it mean to innovate when these things are accessible to everyone? Also, when you think of this idea of not visiting websites anymore, it could like what is how do companies have to communicate when they're not trying to have things like scarcity based marketing messaging and fear and oh you have to buy this or you're going to miss out or you have to get this or your life is over, when they have to have more kind of transparent value based communications with their customers, because an AI isn't going to fall for that scarcity stuff, right? It's going to go out and act on your behalf. So I like to think this kind of goes back to the top down, bottom up stuff. There's a lot of fear and anxiety that AI, we're going to have these monolithic AI companies that are going to rule the world. Of course, that's kind of the story we've been told from Hollywood for the last 40, 50 years. I like to think that AI is also going to empower us in ways that are really unanticipated. So it's really kind of exciting. And natural language, to go back to your question, is really kind of at the core of that. I mean, like someone like myself, I came from a humanities background. I'm not a developer. I actually used AI to learn how to create apps, and I've been developing apps. Been developing AI models. I've been using AI to basically like I ask AI what it needs to train itself, and then I end up creating that as an output, which is really kind of fascinating.
it's really interesting to hear about new products and just thinking about all the startups and the opportunities there. Last night, just because it's here in San Francisco, I was at J.P. Morgan Healthcare Conference,
Mhm.
talking to a number of different people and startup investors and also people who are in the venture capital space, private equity. And I talked to an individual who was a product specialist, and I asked the question, tell me about what is the most interesting product that you've worked on. And what they did is they held up their phone and they said, anything that goes in this.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and imagine what's next, right?
Absolutely. And interesting. You were talking about like the future and abundance, and I'm thinking how over time, go through the industrial revolution and then the technology and then information revolution, et cetera, how basically what these tools have done is enabled man to leverage his labor and his output and what we get in society. And, GDP is a great measure of this type of thing, right? And then there's all this press about labor shortages in certain professions and industries. So yeah, I see that AI as being a tool that's going to really, I think, help our world, our society, help humans deal with a lot of problems that we have currently. On the it's almost like a utopian side, but then there's the dystopian. To be careful for misuse of AI, right? We've got all these deep fakes and stuff going on there. Um, how do you see this balance of the utopian dystopian AI future and any guardrails that we might have, or how are we going to control that, or at least be able to sniff it out, know when we're being deep faked, etc.
Well, I think in the next like 10 to 20 years, you can see that Apple and Meta both started coming out with headsets that are having augmented reality, right? So you're starting to layer this digital content on top of the physical world. And I think that over time, I think that technology is going to start being integrated into glasses. I think we'll have holograms. We'll be able to start interacting with our natural environment in a more kind of intuitive way. And I think that AI will be behind that. So you can imagine content that is dynamically generated. You can imagine all different types of shared experiences that you might have with other people. At the same time, I think that as that happens, I think there will be an entirely new economy that will start to emerge. I think in many ways it will be a kind of evolution of the influencer economy that we're seeing in social media. And so when I hear people talking about things like AI is going to replace all these jobs, I appreciate that, but I also feel like AI is going to create an entirely new class of jobs. And I think when in this like idea of like utopia versus dystopia, I imagine that when you're able to interact with different types of content that's layered on top of reality, that's just an incredible amount of creativity and artistic freedom and different types of possibilities. I think there's going to be a kind of opening up of creativity. We're going to and also there's going to be at the same time a democratization of access to different types of creative tools. So you'll see people creating, entire films and TV series that are production quality similar to Hollywood. That's going to be available to almost anyone. So there's certainly a lot of I think justified fears and anxieties around what happens when these kind of giant AI companies have a sort of monolithic presence, especially if they become entrenched in government. I appreciate that, but I also feel like I want to focus on this kind of bottom up possibility of possibility and potential.
I've got a question for both you, David, for your opinion, and Ray, your opinion. I want to go back to the early days of the internet
Hmm.
because we're in an adoption cycle. And one of the things that ended up happening there is we had all kinds of startup companies that ultimately failed. And one of the metrics they pointed to at that time was the number of eyeballs they had. What metric should we be thinking about now in AI?
That's a good question. Well, I think one of the things that we've learned over the last 20 years is that the metric of engagement has had a disastrous effect on society. So a lot of social media has been optimized around engagement, and engagement as a metric tends to translate into lots of rage, lots of like craving for instant gratification, lots of kind of knee-jerk reactions to stuff. I would like to think of some type of metrics that are more correlated with shift in emotional well-being, shift
It tugs on
in health and
emotions.
wellness. Yeah, I would like to think of metrics that are more correlated with the long-term benefits to humanity. I think there's been so much emphasis. You know, it's interesting. Like it used to be. I remember going to tech conferences, and they used to correlate like device adoption with with health and growth of society. And now you find that the tech leaders are telling their kids that they actually want to restrict the amount of hours that they're spending with technology, right? So there's a lot of things, that assumptions that we thought were true over the last 20 years that have actually proven to not
Right,
be so.
right. I would Alan, I remember those days, right? You go to do your
Yeah,
pitch deck to the VCs, and all you talked about was the eyeballs,
yeah, and the Super Bowl
right?
ads. You remember that? That's
And
coming up.
and oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Those I'm really interested in those. Last year was all the digital currency, right? We can be.
Mhm.
I don't think that's going to be
Yeah,
back this year, but I think to answer that question, the point you just brought up, Alan, um, and I love David's position that we got to find a way to measure better, like emotional improvement and
mhm,
psychological improvement, and versus pure engagement, right? Because not all
mhm,
engagement is good.
mhm,
Um, from a business perspective, I would come back to the fundamentals, and that's what Web 1.0 taught us.
yeah,
Is you want to be careful what input you measure. You really
Mm,
want to be measuring output or result. And what is the
yeah,
I don't care what went into it. I care what comes out of it. What's the result? And at the end of the day, um, are we making our, say, climate and the environment a better place, and slowing down the heating up of the planet? Are we making people more healthy
mm,
physically, emotionally, spiritually? And then honestly, hey, we're a capitalist country, society here. I mean, are we generating revenue, and are we generating profit? How are we using these tools
yeah,
to do that? But in a good way, right? Not
yeah.
evil profit, but good profit. So, capitalists got to come back to the bottom line and
Yep.
cash flow,
Sure.
and then we also want to cover the other stuff too.
Well,
absolutely.
are you interested in having me answer my own question?
Go for it.
All
I
right.
am.
Yeah. So I didn't have an answer at first, but then I listened to what you said, and I listened to what you, David. I listened to what you said. I listened to what you said, Ray, and then I started thinking about it a little bit. And one of the things that I think actually brings both of your answers together into a single metric is what I'm going to call brand loyalty. And so,
Mm.
you know how we've had on Avoid Crisis, how many times where we've said something here, and then all of a sudden the mainstream media picks it up much, much later. We talked about Sudan and the Red Sea. Now all of a sudden we have people who are talking about how it's going to disrupt the supply chain and how inflation is going to be impacted. And we can go back and talk about the regional bank crisis and talk about interest rates and all that type of thing. But AI movements now are really going to need to have some sort of a metric that's going to be tied to valuation. If brand loyalty is something to point to, then you're going to display that, because if you feel good about it, taking the humanities side of this, right, you're going to be loyal to that entity. And the same thing is, if that brand loyalty is there, most likely that's going to generate revenue, ultimately profit, which is going to give the capitalist what they want.
I think that, but I think also, I mean, it can seem like a fuzzy metric, but also evaluating your customers' satisfaction. So it's not just
Yeah.
about loyalty. It's
Yeah.
how actually happy are they with you?
I'm not saying eyeballs was fuzzy, you
Yeah.
know? I mean, it worked for certain, I mean, certain things
Yeah.
where there was enough engagement, enough eyeballs, it led to ultimately much more. And,
Yeah.
but it is, all metrics are kind of judgmental in one way or another.
Yeah.
I want to also go back to something else because we've talked about a lot of the tools. There's one tool that I know that you've had a little bit more interaction with, and maybe this would just be good to kind of explain to our audience about
Sure.
how tools get used in AI, and that's your customized instruction path. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that with artificial intelligence tools and how you can provide the customized instructions.
Sure. So um, you can think of custom instructions. Custom instructions are basically you're instructing the AI what to do. So when custom instructions initially came out as a feature, it was recommended that you would do things like you would say, um, you know, you would tell them who you are, and you would tell the AI about the types of responses that you want, and so you would customize it primarily, kind of like turning it into what people think of as like a persona. Like you
Mm.
kind of have it as be a act like a particular type of person or role. What I found with custom instructions was that I could actually do things like, let's say you want to build a marketing campaign, or you want to build a proposal or a brand, or you want to build a marketing funnel, or you need to create a financial model, or whatever it is. I realize that there are proven best practices for how to do those things, right? That come from different types of industries. And so I thought, well, what if I take these steps and encode them in the custom instructions? So then I know if I'm building my brand or creating a proposal or doing something in finance, or whatever it is, I know that I can go from start to finish, and the AI is going to guide me through those best practices. That's what I would say is really the kind of the underlying model that I've been focusing on. It's using natural language to create sets of custom instructions that guide the AI through a particular workflow. And what happens when you do that is then the AI is basically just engaging in dialogue. And instead of you having to worry about what type of prompt you write, it just says, okay, like, tell me more about your brand, or tell me more about this, or we'll ask follow-up questions. It's trained to ask those questions. It's trained to engage in dialogue. It's also trained to make sure and get your confirmation at each step. So a big problem with AI, you probably heard of things, people refer to the term as hallucinations, or sometimes AI will plagiarize content. What happens is, like, if you say something like, write me a 2,000 word blog post about finance, or whatever the topic, it's going to write 2,000 words. You don't know where that came from. You don't know if the logical structure and the outline, all that stuff is going to be the best way it needs to be. So if you're going step by step using custom instructions, the way that I've designed my stuff, and the way that I teach and train my AI models, you're able to kind of fact check, make sure everything's going well at each step. You're also able to focus on sharing your ideas, and you don't have to worry about what you're going to have to say next. And that just it completely transforms the user experience, which means it makes it just a lot easier for the average person to use it. So I'd say that the custom instruction stuff has been the core of my approach. It's something also that it's a method that I've developed based upon the work I've been doing over the last 20 years.
Ray, any other questions for David here today? So I'm not hearing you, Ray, but
Looks like you're muted.
yeah, I think.
No, this has been great, David. Thanks for joining us on the show. Want to remind the listeners, if you'd like to engage with David deeper, the website is creatorpro.ai. You're going to see there that there's a couple of different ways to do this, like a video only, we help you do it or we do it for you kind of idea, of engaging with AI and using it in your work, in your practice, in your business, whatever that area would be. Um, uh, Thanks so much, David, for coming on the show. Uh, this was pretty insightful, and I'm looking forward to digging in a little deeper with you once the show's over. Alan, anything else that you want to do to wrap up?
Sure. Maybe we can just give our audience how to connect with us at avoidcrisis.com, and you can reach me at alan@avoidcrisis.com. Ray, for you, it's Ray, R-E-Y, at
Rey at avoidcrisis.com.
Yeah.
And David, how can our listeners reach you if they want to follow up?
So you can find me at the website creatorpro.ai. You can also find me at LinkedIn, DPasiak, or on Facebook. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure having this conversation with y'all. And thanks so much for listeners and all of you who are with us till
for our
the
listeners, David's last name was Pasiak.
Pasiak, yes, P-A-S-S-I-A-K.
Right. That's what I wanted to throw out was the spelling.
Yeah, P-A-S-S-I-A-K.
And thank you very much for coming on, David. Enjoyed it quite a bit, and good to see
Likewise.
you again, Ray. And thanks again, David.
Thank you.